Hello and welcome to that Red and Blue podcast. Tonight, we are going to be looking at the current events that are going on in New Jersey. Apparently, there's some strange things going on in the night. There may be a possible bomb. Who knows? It may be just surveillance. May just be people messing around. Don't know. But it could also be just us. It could be what's called a social contagion. And that is a theory we're going to be looking at tonight because it is something that causes mass hysteria. And ironically, in New Jersey, this happened in 1938 due to a broadcast of War of the Worlds. So there's a bit of irony here. And I'm going to enjoy, and I hope you do too, taking a look at it. So, what's going on with these drones? People are discussing that they are everywhere. We see it all over the media, social media, on the news. It's huge. They are flooding everything. One thing in particular that happened, a big deal, and it really ratcheted it up a bit, is there was an individual who posted a video on TikTok. I tried to find it, but it's missing. It's probably been censored, which is probably a good idea to try and tone things down a bit. But he suggested with authority that these drones are looking for a nuclear weapon. That is a big claim and a very big deal. The hysteria that can cause is most likely the reason why I couldn't find it again. So, we are going to take a look at social contagion theory, which is a theory that lays in the field of the social sciences, particularly sociology. And what it is, the basic idea of it, you can tell from the word contagion, is it's the idea that behaviors, emotions, ideas spread like a virus between people. So, a good example of this is the idea or the events that occur and why it's illegal to scream fire in a movie theater. People panic, people run, people get trampled, and people get hurt and die. It's a danger. So, what's going on in New Jersey? I suggest the social contagion. So, let's take a look at the social contagion theory. So, the social contagion theory posits that behaviors, emotions, and ideas can rapidly spread within a social network, influencing individuals to adopt and replicate them. Now, this is huge now, just given social media, right? Things spread in an instant. And we even have a term for it, right? Things are going viral. Ironically, social contagion theory, right? Viral contagion. So, this states that there are two types of contagion. There are more, but these are the primary ones. Echo contagion. It occurs when messages are amplified and spread rapidly through social media or other communication channels, resulting in a viral effect. Hysterical contagion. This occurs when people collectively experience symptoms of illness or distress, primarily due to psychological factors rather than a physical cause. Example, fleeing the scene in emergency. If in a large crowd where one person begins running and flailing their arms as if panic, others in the crowd will immediately do the exact same thing. They will run in the same direction and exhibit the same sense of fright. This is a highly adaptive reflex in most mammals. This kind of stuff is just programmed into us, and it makes sense when it comes to survival. But things have changed in the modern day. So, how does this relate to now? what I'd like to do is to keep that definition in mind of social contagion theory and now take a look at what occurred in New Jersey in 1938 with the War of the Worlds broadcast. I have a video and an article describing it.
We are bringing you an...
So this is the original broadcast in 1938.
Witness account of what's happening on the Wilmuth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
One note on this happened on Halloween.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmer's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain's conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object, while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Ah! The whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks for the automobiles, spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indelkoffer, speaking at a dinner of the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We continue now with our piano interlude.
That is the first epic troll of all time. Could you imagine it then? Like the lack of communication, just how long it would take to get the message that this isn't actually occurring. Now, mind you, there were, and we'll get into this here in a minute, there were like 4 broadcasts before this, letting people know that it would be a joke. And even at the end of the broadcast, they did make a note. It wasn't here, but it's around. So next up is an article called "The Day Martians Took Over the World." And this just kind of gives a detailed description of what's going on. And look at that. The Day Martians Took New Jersey. Orson Welles, 1938, War of the Worlds broadcast. Irony, right? You gotta love it. If you can only hear this, there's an article that shows how serious this was. So, more than 82 years. This was done in 2020. 86 years ago, today, Morris County residents followed breaking real-time coverage of an alien invasion of New Jersey, or so they thought. A reporter interviewing Princeton astronomy professor Pearson, played by Orson Welles, recounted observations of explosions on the surface of Mars, followed by sightings of a device descending upon a farm in Grover's Mill. Now, you might recognize this image from the movie The War of the Worlds with everybody's favorite Tom Cruise. After interviewing the farm's owner, the reporter followed police officers' attempts to control the growing number of spectators surrounding the otherworldly object until gray tentacled beings emerged from the craft and began incinerating observers with a heat ray. Then the broadcast went silent. Listeners followed along as the National Guard deployed from Trenton and infantry investigated the spacecraft as a massive war machine emerged, elevated above 3 large legs, and proceeded to decimate the soldiers. Intense. Resulting in waves of civilians fleeing into nearby towns and cities throughout South Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. Can you imagine your neighbor coming and run over and be like, dude, you won't believe what I heard? Over the next hour, news bulletins from across the eastern seaboard purportedly relayed the progress of Martian invaders as they encountered successive waves of Army and Air Force resistance and systematically obliterated all traces of human life in their path towards New York City. I wonder if I can find like some B-rolls from the movie. Okay. Another article just showing radio play so realistic hundreds thought into the world at hand. Orson Welles' now famous dramatization of H.G. Wells' 1897 science fiction novel, War of the Worlds, initially panicked hundreds of listeners who either dialed into the broadcast midway or did not hear the 4 periodic announcements stating that this was a fictional account presented by the Mercury Theater for Halloween Eve. The Daily Record's October 31st, 1938 edition described the ensuing pandemonium as people running, screaming through the streets, taking children out of theaters, deluging police, I need to get glasses, headquarters, and the homes of officers and newspapers, men with telephone calls, and fleeing wildly from one place to another. Now, this is a really good example of, keep in mind that no one confirmed a single thing. Like, yes, people were calling, but these people reacting in this manner, they didn't know. I mean, they were being told this, yes, but nothing was confirmed. This is all word of mouth. Morristown Police Headquarters alone fielded more than 50 calls asking how bad damage was in the town and how many residents had been killed in the attack. I really wouldn't be worried about the damage in the town at that point. While nearby Dover and Madison each were contacted by callers demanding information on how to defend against the poison gas and heat waves wielded by invading Martians. Most residents of Basking Ridge responded to fictionalized reports that their entire town had been decimated with bemusement, while levels of fear varied within the other towns mentioned in the Columbia broadcast. Naturally, if those caught up in the WABC drama bothered to tune into other radio stations, they would have heard standard Sunday evening programming, as opposed to breaking news coverage of Armageddon. Thousands of other listeners took the broadcast for what it was, an early Halloween scary story enhanced by audio effects and convincing acting. This part right here, if they just would have tuned in to another broadcast, it would have been just a standard evening of programming. It's true. It's cognitive laziness. There's another article talking about it. And it's also a really good example of how we don't fact check. I mean, we say we fact check, not sure, but primary sources, good information. Not all listeners were amused by the invasion, with numerous angry complaints phoned or telegraphed to the Federal Communication Commission. FCC Chair Frank P. McNinch directed the Columbia Broadcasting Company to furnish a transcript of the program for possible investigation, noting the widespread public reaction to the broadcast, as indicated by the press, is another demonstration of the power and force of radio, and points out again the serious public responsibility of those who are licensed to operate stations. And this is an excellent point. The people in media have a great amount of power and responsibility, not to quote Spider-Man, but it's true. It's true. They really do. They are what would be called, gatekeepers of information. They are seen as the primary source and trusted by people. And if they are a gatekeeper, they control what people hear and what they know. It's a pivotal role in society. It really is. Attempting to calm public sentiment and reiterate that the dramatization was merely intended as a holiday treat, actor-director Orson Welles quickly convened a November 1st press conference. The theatrical group had doubts about producing the drama, not out of concern it would be taken seriously, he said, but because the play might appear too old-fashioned for modern consumption. That is funny. In classic New Jersey fashion, one local resident threatened to sue the radio station over the anxiety inflicted upon his wife. If this would happen again, that is what would happen, and they would win. Who, he said, suffered a heart attack upon hearing Martian invaders were traveling toward them en route to Manhattan. For their part, Army and Navy officials warned against the adverse results that fictionalized portrayals could have on public readiness in the face of a real emergency broadcast. That's an interesting concern. One Daily Record editorial opined that fleeting attention spans and gullibility were responsible among those caught up in the dramatic reading. It's easy to blame the people, but I also understand where they are coming from and that type of reaction with, the power of authority in social interactions. How we perceive those who do have authority, which is a study in its own. Just the little cues that we pick up on, whether known or not. It would tend to prove one thing which newspapers had known from experience. That is that too many people, seemingly not too intelligent, only about half listen or read and therefore get greatly excited over something that is not so. Wow. That would hurt to hear if you were one of those individuals. Daily Record editors further noted that while the radio does much to disseminate the quicker spread of news than a newspaper, it has its failings in that, unless one happens to be tuned into a particular station at a certain moment, the flash is lost forever. Newspapers, in contrast, are by their nature bound in physicality and thus more permanent and held to account for their content, the paper opined. Americans frequently recall the 1938, don't know how frequently, it's not coming up right now, recall the 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast as a lesson in how extenuating circumstances such as the decade-long economic depression and ensuing factionalism that bred conspiracy theories can lead to mass panic in response to an otherwise unlikely event. The first time that I heard about this, I was in grad school, and we were discussing obviously the effects of media on society. Dr. Coleman, I hope you're doing well if you ever hear this. Miss ya. Wells himself concluded the evening's program with the now infamous sign-off, and this is a quote. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight, that grinning, glowing, globular invaders of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch. And if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian. It's Halloween. And this I find interesting. You should be able to interpret that this was a joke given the sign off. It suggests that obviously people did not listen to the entire broadcast, at least those who were spreading this infectious idea, and just took off and told everybody that they could in a panic. So think about the number of people who reacted without evidence, and consider how people know what these things are without knowing. It's a really good example of what's going on right now. So many people seeing things that they claim are one thing, but they don't know what it is, right? They're making an assumption of it. The amount of people that did not listen to the entire broadcast obtaining all the information before coming to an informed conclusion. So, moving forward, we're going to take a look at what's going on today in the news and how it's being portrayed. And we can see this kind of similarity or compare and contrast between the news of then and today.
Hold on, take a look at this. Think you can tell what's real anymore? What you're looking at right now isn't a traditional
SUV-sized drones in New Jersey. Dozens of reports seen near military bases, armories, civilian areas, over people's houses, properties owned by...
Couldn't be the military just testing stuff, right?
President-elect Trump. The FBI...
You know what that looks like right there? It looks like a plane with... You know what? Maybe that's a light on one wing, like on the left, and then a light on the right wing, and then maybe another light, at the end of the plane. Maybe that has something to do with regulation, but who knows? It could just be an alien spacecraft. What do I know?
It says they've been investigating it for a month. A month? But many, like my next guests, say the response has been tepid. What could they be, and how is this so hard to figure out? Joining us now is New Jersey.
Is it hard to figure out? Is it?
State Senator John Bramnick and former defense and intel official who investigated UFOs for the federal government, Luis Elizondo. Thank you for having both of you here. I appreciate it. Senator, let me ask you, what do you make of how your requests to satisfy people's curiosity?
Just one thing, the title of this, are UFOs or drones flying over New Jersey? Just think of how that primes the audience to consider that it's UFOs. That, and it is a headline, right? It's more interesting.
Been met by other officials?
Not very well. Either the government doesn't know anything, or the government is in a position where it's an embarrassment to the people of the state of New Jersey, because people already come to the table with distrust of government. This adds to distrust. And I'm deeply concerned that people are going to come up with conspiracy theories. You see them on the internet all the time. So this doubled down, and it double downs on the people who make up theories and also don't trust government. So it...
the whole distrusting government thing, maybe there's reasons why they don't tell the public. Like maybe to not have events like this occur, which would cause mass hysteria.
A double whammy on government.
Have they told you anything, Senator, about what to say or what to think?
The only thing I heard is Governor Murphy did a press conference while he was signing another bill, and he indicated he wasn't concerned with the safety of residents. But the residents I represent are deeply concerned.
Do you see the red light flashing on that image?
But the residents I represent are deeply concerned that they need a lot more information
happening like in a pattern.
than a blanket statement that it's still safe out there. That's simply not enough. We're
Same with that one.
a briefing tomorrow in Trenton, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say.
Well, you got a platform here to tell the country what you're finding out and what you're not finding out whenever.
And there's that one as well. You know, I've known planes to have red lights that tend to flash in order to get people's attention.
On it. Mr. Elizondo, it's good to have you again. What's your guess on this? I mean, look, the good news is you see a lot of navigation lights on these things. You see red and greens on
There we go. Way to go, Kumo.
a lot of these, which, as you know, are familiar lighting that people put on drones over a certain size. What's your guess as to why there's so many over Jersey all of a sudden?
Well,
Here's where the real speculation starts to happen. I haven't watched the entire thing, but seen it in others.
surprisingly enough, it's not just over Jersey. Recently, over a few weeks ago, we had a very similar issue over Langley Air Force Base, one of our most sensitive military installations. And frankly, if you look back the last 4 or 5 years, there was actually a very similar occurrence back in Colorado, where for weeks, local and state law enforcement officials were chasing these things in the skies, almost doing a racetrack pattern, and no one seemed to know what the heck was going on. Actually, this is one of the very reasons why I decided to testify before Congress a few weeks ago, because quite frankly, we don't really have control of our U.S. airspace. We don't have awareness of.
Wouldn't it be interesting if the prior event this individual noted came to New Jersey already primed to see these lights in the sky and then started spreading it? Wouldn't that be crazy?
In our skies.
Do you believe that the FBI has been looking for a month and doesn't have any answer about what these are when there's so many?
Well, I've worked with the FBI in the past, and they tend to be very, very.
I have this information that I'll divulge later, but wait till you hear how many licensed drones are in New Jersey.
When they're doing investigations, I do believe they have some answers. I don't think they have all the answers yet. What further makes this more complicated, you have an issue where these things are being seen over civilian airspace, so you have jurisdictional issues, right? You have, from a federal perspective, you have FBI leading the law enforcement investigation, but you also have the Department of Defense. You have folks like the U.S. Air Force and Office of Special Investigations. You have DHS and even the FAA. And so all these federal agencies, forget about even the state and local agencies, are trying to work together and try to deconflict what's in the skies. And unfortunately, they just don't seem to have a common operating picture right now of exactly what we're dealing with.
You think they're wrong about the size? Because, it's not easy to find drones of any significant size on the commercial market.
Yeah, so here's the problem, Chris. Great point. We know that commercial drones tend to be a typical size, and they use a certain amount of power, if you will, and have a certain amount of loiter time, a certain amount of range. And typically can be anywhere between 15, maybe 20 minutes if you're lucky. And then you have to have line of sight in order to control these things. If you talk about anything bigger than that, you're really talking about a state-sponsored capability. This isn't a hobbyist. This isn't a drone that someone buys, let's say, from Radio Shack or buys from Amazon. This is something far more complex that can be flown beyond line of sight, i.e. over the horizon, and has a loiter capability in some cases of several hours. And if you're talking about an SUV size or larger potentially drone, this is a problem. Look, the U.S. Navy has been reporting these types of drones, in some cases the size of cars and even bigger, for years now. And this is exactly emphasizing the point why we need to take this topic seriously.
Hey, thanks for watching.
There is a good conversation to be had about setting up regulations for these drones. A big one, especially for people's privacy. So, another thing, just regarding, well, here, let's watch this first. I wanted to demonstrate the more extreme portions of our society. Specifically, I mean, there could be other things going on. It's always possible. But the alien thing might be a little bit far. I mean, why would they just come out and hang in New Jersey? I mean, is that the best place to go? I don't think so. But hey, whatever. If that's your thing, go for it, dude. So, of course, I went to the best place in society to get good information, well reasoned from very considerate individuals who have your best interests at heart. So, of course, I went to InfoWars, where they battle the process of logical deduction every day. Let's check this out.
I would assess 100% certainty that the military may not know about them, but the intelligence community, again, I would assess 100% certainty that the military may not know about them, but the intelligence community, the CIA, the NSA, the NRO know about them for sure.
So, this individual, just some context. I'm going to read this off the site. On the Wednesday Alex Jones show, guest host Mike Adams spoke with former Defense Intelligence Agency whistleblower. So apparently blowing a whistle gives him some credibility. Mind you, he's whistleblowing over something that he actually knows, right? This is not the case. Jeffrey Prather about the drone phenomenon, which Prather described as a psychological operation to distract from the real crimes of the Biden administration, such as trafficking children through the southern border. That's a big claim. It doesn't even make sense, but we'll get to that.
And that they're running the test on those. Part of this is all a psyop. And the first part of the psyop is so that you're looking up and thinking about drones. So you're not thinking about the last 4 years where our government has been trafficking children, trafficking women, trafficking arms and terrorists into the country.
So check that out. His argument is to create a distraction to stop you from thinking about something that, I don't know about you, but I haven't been thinking about that. That is not something I think about often. I don't think a lot of people think about that often. I think people are thinking about what's going on in their lives. So why distract people from something they don't even care about? It doesn't even affect them. But hey, believe what you want.
And kidnapping, and is still doing that. That there are military flights now flying in where the border has receded a bit, where military flights are still flying in likely known terrorists for more. So that's the first part of it. Is it's a psyop, because if you want to do it, collect intelligence, you do it low profile. So because it's not low profile, it's a information.
That's just the first part. It's going to get good.
Influence operations.
But what is the end goal? I'm sorry to keep interrupting you.
This person knows absolutely nothing.
Time is really short. What's the end goal of this particular psyop? You mentioned a distraction strategy. I get that. But that doesn't seem to be enough of a motivation for something this big to happen, where you have a weapons corporation that has just decided to do whatever the heck it wants over the skies of American cities with, the population be damned and the lawmakers be damned. Like nobody.
So here we go. We're going to make another antagonist in the story, the corporations, right? Which is a great one to put to the target audience that is InfoWars audience.
Read in on this apparently at the local level, right? So they must have a bigger end goal. What is that?
Well, the corporations are doing this at the behest of the CIA, the intelligence community, the deep state, make no mistake, and they're just classifying it at very high levels. But the other end goal of this is to maybe bring in some kind of bombing.
Maybe bring it in. Like, there's the hedge. But I'm still going to speak about it like I know.
Pre-inauguration, or maybe even after inauguration, so that a continuity of government. And Dark Journalist talked about this on Alex Jones the other day. So a continuity of government can come in with Northcom. That is a very viable solution, because they don't want Trump's DOJ to start coming after them, because they've mass murdered millions with the bioweapon. They've trafficked children.
Nothing is ever going to happen from that. Ever.
The tens, maybe the hundreds of thousands. So they want to distract from that. If they can turn the DOJ and the DOD onto some kind of external threat where it's Iranians or...
You can tell in this image, I mean, obviously it's not New Jersey. So that is a different topic. Even you want to go there. I'm just saying it doesn't pertain to my argument here.
Russians, and I think this is also why Kirillov was killed as well, because
Which is very misleading, by the way. Not everybody would notice that it is DC. Mind you, that is the White House. But the focus on this is the lights, right? It is very misleading by this source of media. It's not even media. I mean, it's entertainment.
Also their nuclear expert. So now they can start to build the legend that there were loose nukes or SATMs.
So now we're going to throw in nukes. That's a big one. That is a big one. I wonder if he even considers the impact of what his words could have on people. There's an individual that, I don't know if you want to call it work together or not, but was at work. I'll call him John. And all the media that he consumed was from this site. Now, ironically, his interactions with people were not that well. The things that would come out of his mouth were absolutely crazy. I mean, they would go, in my opinion, beyond the suggestions of the site. I guess I'm saying this because these beliefs do affect your personal relationships. I think often people speak but don't consider the effect that it might have in their personal relationships. Often we only spend time with people who hold the same belief as we do. But if you want to have a larger circle, I think it's good to keep an open mind. So, we had the sub-themes in that, the suggestions of the nuclear bomb, the government bad guys, everything that you want to give the audience for those consuming things from this site, that is InfoWars. So, how social contagion works in this drone phenomenon, like applying it to this specifically. I'm going to give an image that can demonstrate the structure. And they call these like cyclical structures, but really it's just like a network. So here we just have points that demonstrate, let's say, a individual on each one and the spreading of them, right? So here, got one going to another, an infected individual. Those are identified by the orange. Those who are susceptible. So let's say that broadcaster that we just seen, he is an infected individual. The people that are specifically in his audience, which I would say are highly susceptible to the beliefs that he is purporting, those individuals would be these other nodes. So here is kind of like the basic idea of how this works. And I'm going to bring up a little image that I made. Okay, thanks for waiting. So we have the sightings, and this is called like a feedback loop, right? We have sightings. People begin to see these lights. Then we have their belief of what it is. So let's say an individual that has a proclivity to believe that these, or let's just say a proclivity for conspiracy theories or extreme beliefs, they see it, they apply their beliefs onto it, They make a post, a social media post, based on their experiences or personal beliefs. They suggest that it's aliens, right? You get people who are then commenting and reacting on this, often people that agree. They agree with the suggestion that the post is making. They kind of create a little feedback loop within themselves because it reinforces the belief that it was suggesting. And then all of a sudden, you have new sightings that are occurring, right? They're happening all the time, extremely frequent. I think the main thing to consider here is that they're between this point right here and this point right here, there is also something that happens that's really important. People become primed to see something. In other words, you hear that there are lights in the sky. You go outside for a walk at night, all of a sudden, you're going to be looking for lights in the sky too, right? You are primed to perceive a certain thing that might occur. You are looking for it, and you are probably, most likely, going to find it. That is a very interesting concept. And just to give a little bit more information on that, feedback loops in sociology, they're circular chains of interactions. And they amplify something or suppress it in an initial change. So they can be positive or negative. They can increase the belief, spread it among the people, or it can disseminate and lower the chance of it occurring. It just kind of depends on who it hits. So it's something that can be used to look and understand its social phenomena, behavior, and conflict escalation. Now, I have an article that gives a little bit more detailed explanation and something that brings it more applicable to modern times. This is out of the Journal of Science. It is titled The Spread of Behavior in Online Social Networks. And they have a little experiment about it. It gets a little thick and a little dense, but here's the idea. They question, how do social networks affect the spread of behavior? A popular hypothesis states that networks with many clustered ties and a high degree of separation will be less effective for behavioral diffusion than networks in which locally redundant ties are rewired to provide shortcuts across the social space. So the behavioral diffusion, that's talking about like the destruction of the belief, right? When it talks about like the clustered ties, talking about the distance between the individuals it is spreading from. So 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees. And that becomes something they're going to test. A competing hypothesis argues that when behaviors require social reinforcement, a network with more clustering may be more advantageous, even if the network has a whole with more clustering may be more advantageous, even if the network has a larger diameter. I investigated the effects of network structure on diffusion by studying the spread of health behavior through artificially structured online communications. Individual adoption was much more likely when participants received social reinforcement from multiple neighbors in the social network. The behavior spread farther and faster across clustered lattice networks than across corresponding random networks, and that was the abstract. Now, there's no way. This is the introduction, which gives a general idea, makes their suggestion of what their hypothesis will be. Many behaviors spread through social contact. As a result, the network structure of who is connected to whom can critically affect the extent to which a behavior diffuses across a population. There are two competing hypotheses about how network structure affects diffusion. The strength of weak ties, that connection hypothesis predicts that networks with many long ties, small world topologies, will spread a social behavior farther and more quickly than a network in which ties are highly clustered. It's an interesting thought. I can understand where they're kind of going with this. This hypothesis treats the spread of behavior as a simple contagion, such as disease or information. A single contact with an infected individual is usually sufficient to transmit the behavior. I love the idea, the analogy, metaphor between an idea and virus. I love it. So true. A single contact with an infected individual is usually sufficient to transmit the behavior. The power of long ties is that they reduce the redundancy of the diffusion process by connecting people whose friends do not know each other. This idea, although I'll give you a hint, doesn't really pan out, but it makes sense in a lot of ways. I can see why the question occurred. I mean, if you tell somebody that is, 3 degrees of separation, let's say they might not have contact with that initial primary source, or other people who are close to that primary source who may diffuse it quicker. It may take longer to get to that point again. People whose friends do not know each other, thereby allowing a behavior to rapidly spread to other areas of the network. The ideal case for this lack of redundancy is a random network in which, in expectation for a large population, each of an individual's ties reaches out to different neighborhoods. The other hypothesis states that, unlike disease, social behavior is a complex contagion. People usually require contact with multiple sources of infection. So, with multiple sources of infection, remember how in that image there were points where someone had interacted with more than one? Multiple sources of infection before being convinced to adopt a behavior. This hypothesis predicts that because clustered networks have more redundant ties, which provide social reinforcement for adoption, they will better promote the diffusion of behaviors across large populations. Despite the scientific and practical importance of understanding the spread of behavior through social networks, an empirical test of these predictions has not been possible because it requires the ability to independently vary topological structure of a social network. I love reading academic papers. The grammar is just amazing. APA, gotta love it. Okay. So again, just to wrap that up, social distance affects spreads. One model is going to test close ties, other cluster. Basically tries to replicate real world events by making a controlled experiment. I tested the effects of network structure on diffusion using a controlled experimental approach. I studied the spread of a health behavior through a network-embedded population by creating an internet-based health community containing 1,528 participants recruited from health interest worldwide websites. That is a large population size. So he created a social network of his own. What this kind of goes into it about is he creates a closed network separate from outside influence. In other words, people from the outside who may know the truth or have information that goes against it that could diffuse it cannot do that. So he limits their ability to get other information. Participants made decisions about whether or not to adopt a health behavior based on the adoption patterns of their health buddies. The health behavior used for this study was the decision to register for an internet-based health forum. This ensured that the only sources of encouragement that participants had to join the forum were the signals that they received from their health buddies. So here's an example of the conditions. We have one where there are multiple ties, or an increased amount of ties in comparison to the other one. The network topologies were created before the participants arrived, and the participants could not alter the topology in which they were embedded In other words, making new ties. Each node in a social network had an identical number. Sorry, that was funny. An identical number of neighbors as the other nodes in the network, and participants could only see the immediate neighbors to whom they were connected. So this whole part is just arguments for effectiveness of the statistical models that he uses, the tests. And here are the results. The results show that network structure has a significant effect on the dynamics of behavioral diffusion. Greater clustering and a larger diameter were much more effective for spreading behaviors. Greater fraction of the population in the cluster networks, those were the solid black circles, than in the random networks, the open triangles. On average, the behavior reached 53.77% of the cluster networks, whereas only 38.26% of the population adopted in the random networks. Significant. Behavior diffused more quickly in the cluster networks than in the random networks. That is important. The average rate of diffusion in the cluster networks was more than 4 times faster than that of the random condition. That is also important. Differences in both the success and the rate of diffusion between network conditions are statistically significant. And then they put a good p-value there. And again, like, that is very important, that rate of diffusion. Look at that. That is an extreme difference. There are images of his results if you can't see it. So, although this finding is consistent with the hypothesis that more redundant ties between neighborhoods can improve the global spread of behavior, it may also include that other topological features such as degree and density are relevant factors affecting behavioral diffusion. This suggests important avenues for future research. I agree. The results show that redundant signals significantly increase the likelihood of adoption. Social reinforcement from multiple health buddies made participants much more willing to adopt the behavior. That is a big one, that point with the social reinforcement. More people are doing it. We're going to hop on that bandwagon. Party on. On the basis of these findings, I predict that public health interventions aimed at the spread of new health behaviors, for instance, improved diet, regular exercise, condom use, or needle exchange, may do better to target clustered residential networks rather than the casual contact networks across which disease may spread very quickly, particularly if the behaviors to be diffused are highly complex, for instance, because they are costly, difficult, or contravene existing norms. Good stuff. So, all of that, it should sound rather familiar as, you know, this event. They are both media-based, and this experiment really replicates it well, in my opinion. The event in 1938, that broadcast, that was isolated to individuals within a county, right? It's a radio broadcast. So, although social media did not exist, it is a clustered environment of people. It's a really interesting it occurring just because it's such a good example of these different ties and how they interact, because the population is specific and the relationships that these individuals have are clustered. So the environment demonstrated its effectiveness along with the experiment in itself. Although we can't necessarily compare because there's no other, you could probably find one, but no other like available event to discern the diffusion rate. I don't know how quickly it disappeared, but it does seem like it diffused rather quickly. So, you know, kind of bringing a lot of this together, both events involved this unknown thing, right? And one of the big unknown things is uncertainty. Uncertainty is a huge, huge topic in what is it? It's not risk assessment, not risk achievement. Okay, it's something starting with risk, but there is specific study in business about it. And there is a lot of research done in behavioral economics about how to use uncertainty to an advantage of, let's say, an insurance company to get people to do certain things, right? You don't know, in the case of insurance, if X will ever happen or not, right? There is uncertainty. How do I get you to pay for that in order to take away your uncertainty? It's really interesting. And that uncertainty, that sparks that mass anxiety with people in what happened in 1938 and what is occurring right now. There are people trying to make sense of the unknown. They're looking for a reason. They're looking for a cause of why this is occurring. And both grew larger. I mean, we don't know what is the cause of this event. We know what the cause was back in 1938. But, they're both occurring because of us and how we are behaving in result of that initial stimulus. So our perception, our fears, our need for an explanation, it fuels our behavior such a great deal. And again, why do we fall for it? I mean, think of the common sense things that we know, or we could look up to consider what is actually happening. Like, what is the probability of this being someone who owns a drone, right? Like a hobbyist or a commercial one. Now, a lot of times, they're talking about the commercial ones like they did in the news article, but I did find a ton of images that look like they are, ones of a hobbyist. And I have a point to that. Here is an article of drones in New Jersey. More than 13,000 are lawfully registered. Let me see if I have a PDF of this. I don't. I'm disappointed in myself. I should have that. No thanks. One sec. Okay. So, New Jersey. Drone sightings continue to be reported throughout New Jersey. As we know, they have little quotes showing the uncertainty or demonstrating it without saying it. Unnerving and creepy. People want an explanation. As it was noted, this is going all the way to the top. People trying to get an explanation. The New Jersey governor, Phil Murphy, U.S. Senator Andy Kim. Apparently they are going on drone hunts, hoping for answers. Way to go, guys. Thank you. I appreciate that. Tax dollars at work. I wonder what they're using to hunt them. On Tuesday, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Department of Justice released another joint statement to comment on the continued spotting of drones in the tri-state area. New York has also seen drones within the past few days. another highly populated area, right? My point to that is, the more people you have, the more likely you are to have people who own drones or enjoy that hobby. So, this is a quote from them. There are more than 1 million drones lawfully registered with the FAA in the United States, and there are thousands of commercial, hobbyist, and law enforcement drones lawfully in the sky on any given day. With the technology landscape evolving, we expect that number to increase over time. So that was a statement from, the FBI, FAA, and DOD. It was a joint statement. Their point being that there's a lot of people who own drones. And here we have again, there are thousands of registered drones in New Jersey. Apparently they compiled a list. The total number of registered drones in the Garden State is 13,067. It remains to be seen where the mysterious drones may be coming from, but officials maintain they are not a threat to public safety. On Monday, Pentagon spokesperson, blah, 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 blah. Great. Thank you. Appreciate your time. So, kind of bringing this all together now, what can we learn from this? Whether it's drones or Martians, we obviously have a reaction to uncertainty and getting information and how these behaviors spread throughout a social network. You hear that there is a UFO flying around, or that there are these sightings. You see a drone with a light, all of a sudden it's okay, aliens, UFO light, let's put them together. Or excuse me, aliens, then you have a drone which might have a light, let's take the aliens, we got the UFO and the light, let's put them together, and all of a sudden we have another war of the worlds where everything is going to be destroyed. Everyone's going to die. Just like that. Not going to say that. But anyway, bad things are going to happen. And history has taught us a lot of lessons. And I think this is a very valuable one. And it has real, current, modern day applicability and needs to be applied to this event and needs to be remembered. Because think about what can occur if a ton of people believe that there's a nuclear bomb, right? If all of a sudden someone on TikTok posts, hey, 60 seconds from now or 60 minutes from now, this is going to happen. Someone speaks from a point of authority. People perceive it as a point of authority, whether it is or not. I mean, how do you know who the hell these people are? You just hear the message like they did in that broadcast. They perceive it as a point of authority and they take off. People will flee. People will go to stores, buy tons of toilet paper. That is a common thing, apparently, in social contagions. You got to have it. You got to have it. Definitely got to have it. It's important, I guess. So, there are real world effects to this. And I think another thing that comes from this topic of discussion is the responsibility of the messages that we put out into the public of those people we perceive in a position of power, whether they have deserved it or should have it or not. Their message that they are giving to the people in the public, it matters and it needs to be considered, like the individuals at InfoWars and other sources. But anyway, this was a very thought-provoking event. I really liked taking a look at it, and I hope you enjoyed these thoughts as well. Hopefully everything will work out. Probably will. Just take some time to diffuse. If you don't mind, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this if you feel like it. And let's stop the spread of fear and start spreading critical thinking into the public. So, see you next time. Thank you for your time. Bye.